A soldier watches a bank of screens somewhere behind the front line in eastern Ukraine, small green shapes crossing the sky in ones and twos. He doesn't reach for a weapon or call anyone. He just watches because he already knows what happens next. One by one, the shapes wander off course and drop, jammed and spoofed before they ever reach whatever they were aimed at. His system has beaten hundreds of these, and tonight looks no different. Then one shape stops behaving like the others. It doesn't waver, doesn't lose lock, holds its course like the jamming isn't even there, because as far as this drone is concerned, it isn't. How do you jam a weapon that was never listening in the first place? By 2022, Russia had turned parts of its front line into something close to a dead zone for radio. The tool doing most of that work was a system called the Krasuka 4, designation 1RL257, a mobile electronic warfare complex built by Russia's KRET defense conglomerate and mounted on an 8-wheeled BAZ-6910 chassis. Think of it as the most aggressive radio DJ on Earth. It doesn't play music. It floods every frequency an enemy drone, radar, or satellite link might use with overwhelming noise, drowning out the real signal until the receiver on the other end has nothing usable left to hear. That's what jamming is, at its core. Not hacking, not disabling, just shouting louder than the other guy until his phone call turns to static. The numbers back up the intimidation. Reported detection range against airborne radar and radio emissions runs out to roughly 200 kilometers, with some sources placing peak performance even further. It can jam satellite links, ground radar, and airborne early warning aircraft across the X, Q, and Ka frequency bands, all from a single vehicle that can be relocated within minutes. And here's why that mattered so much on this particular battlefield. Nearly every drone in the Russia-Ukraine war depended on one of two things: a radio frequency control link back to its pilot, or a GPS signal to know where it was. Both of those are, physically, just a signal traveling through open air. Anyone with enough power and the right receivers can flood that air with noise or feed it false coordinates. There's no lock to pick, no code to break. You just have to be louder. And Russia had built a machine specifically to be louder than anyone. So from roughly 2022 onward, jamming became the default answer to the drone problem on both sides. Coverage got denser. Systems like the Krasuka 4 turned entire stretches of contested airspace into places where radio-controlled drones simply stopped working, and Ukrainian planners had to treat that airspace as a write-off before a mission even started. But a wall built to stop one specific kind of attacker only works as long as the attacker keeps knocking on the same door. In the second half of the war, something started showing up in field reports that didn't fit the pattern. Drones that should have died the moment they crossed into jammed airspace were instead completing their runs. Russian electronic warfare operators, according to accounts circulating from the front, started noticing blips that simply refused to break lock, no matter how much power they threw at them. At first, this looked like an equipment problem, a calibration issue, maybe a gap in coverage. That's the natural assumption when a system that has worked for years suddenly appears to fail. But the pattern kept repeating, and it kept repeating in the same specific way. These drones weren't resisting the jamming or punching through it. They were behaving as if the jamming didn't exist at all. That's because, in the way that mattered to a Krasuka 4, it didn't. These drones weren't transmitting a radio signal for the jammer to find. There was no emission to detect, no frequency to flood, no channel to spoof. The entire premise behind area denial jamming, find the signal and overpower it, requires there to be a signal in the first place. That's the crack in the wall, and it has nothing to do with a stronger drone or a smarter one. It's a drone that simply stopped playing the game the jammer was built to win. The answer was a fiber optic drone, and the concept behind it is almost stubbornly simple. Instead of broadcasting a radio signal to its operator, the drone drags a hair-thin strand of glass fiber behind it as it flies, physically unspooling the cable from a reel mounted underneath. Video, control commands, everything travels down that fiber as pulses of light instead of radio waves through open air. There's no wireless link to jam because none exists. You can't flood a signal that was never broadcast, and you can't spoof a GPS coordinate the drone never needed, not when it's steered by a human on the other end of a physical wire, watching a live feed with total clarity, immune to the noise a Krasuka 4 was built to generate. Shouting louder does nothing here. You'd have to physically find and cut the thread, and by then the drone has usually already reached its target. It sounds almost primitive next to a system that can track a satellite from 200 kilometers away. That's exactly the point. Warfare doesn't reward the more sophisticated system. It rewards whichever system solves the problem in front of it, and this one solved electronic warfare by refusing to participate in it. None of this makes fiber optic drones a perfect weapon, and it's worth being honest about the trade-offs. Spool length caps their range, with reported operational distances of roughly 10 to 20 kilometers depending on the unit and terrain. That fiber can snag on trees, wreckage, or power lines and sever the connection mid-flight. Each spool is a one-time use component, adding cost and weight compared to a standard radio FPV, and flying one demands a pilot who can manage a physical tether the way a fisherman manages a line, not just a joystick. But those limitations turned out to be a price both sides were willing to pay, because the alternative was flying straight into a wall that had never let anything through. The proving ground for this technology at scale was the Kursk salient. When Ukrainian forces pushed across the border into Russia's Kursk region in August 2024, their supply lines ran through a single narrow corridor between Sumy and the town of Sudzha. Russian forces used fiber optic drones to hunt that corridor, monitoring and striking resupply columns in a way radio jamming alone had never managed. Ukrainian troops who fought there later said the only thing that reliably grounded these drones was bad weather, not electronic countermeasures. By March 2025, after 7 months of a fight increasingly shaped by tethered drones picking off vehicles on that one road, Ukrainian forces withdrew from the salient. Reporting on vehicle losses during that campaign suggests Ukraine lost significantly more vehicles than Russia did, though exact figures vary by source and should be treated as estimates rather than confirmed counts. Russia didn't just discover this workaround, it industrialized it. Reporting from late 2025 indicates Russian fiber optic FPV production doubled to more than 50,000 units per month by that September, driven in large part by a dedicated unit known as the Rubicon Center, formed specifically to scale drone warfare as a centralized capability rather than leaving it to individual battalions. But that kind of output doesn't come from nowhere, and this is where the story stops being purely military and starts being economic. Every one of those drones needs actual optical fiber, and Russia's domestic production couldn't keep pace with demand on its own. According to reporting on trade data, Chinese exports of optical fiber cable to Russia grew from roughly 119,000 miles in May 2025 to about 328,000 miles by that August. In that same month, reporting indicates China sent Ukraine a fraction of that volume, in the range of 70 miles. A weapon that looks almost mechanical in its simplicity turns out to rest on a distinctly modern supply chain, and one Russia does not fully control. Neither side has simply accepted the new reality. Because fiber optic drones can't be jammed, both militaries have been forced back toward older, slower detection methods, infrared and thermal cameras that can spot a drone's heat signature, acoustic sensors listening for rotor noise, and in some of the more improvised countermeasures reported from the front, soldiers using nets, wire barriers, or literally cutting a spotted fiber line before the drone reaches its target. None of it scales the way radio jamming once did. You can blanket a valley with electronic noise from a single vehicle. You cannot post a soldier with a pair of scissors on every approach road. There's a particular irony sitting underneath all of this, and it goes back to a single incident in Zaporizhzhia. In November 2023, Ukraine's 14th Separate Regiment reportedly used reconnaissance drones to locate a Russian Krasuka 4 unit that had been concealed in a forest position. Once the system was found, it was destroyed by guided munitions. Open-source tracking at the time valued the loss at roughly $2.6 million and marked one of only a handful of confirmed Krasuka 4 losses since the invasion began. That single incident predates the fiber optic drone era at real scale, but it captures the pattern that would come to define the years after it. A weapon platform built specifically to blind and disable drones was found, tracked, and destroyed by the very category of weapon it was designed to defeat. Not because the drone that found it somehow outran the jamming, but because finding a hidden vehicle in a tree line was never a job the jammer's own defenses were built to handle. That asymmetry is the real story here, more than any single incident. A Krasuka 4 unit represents years of engineering and millions of dollars in production cost. A fiber optic FPV drone, even accounting for its added spool and reel components, typically costs a small fraction of that, often in the low thousands of dollars or less. Russia is reportedly producing more than 50,000 of them a month. It would take generations to produce that many Krasuka 4 systems, and it wouldn't matter if they did, because volume was never the vulnerability this weapon exposed. Russian electronic warfare didn't fail because it was poorly built. The Krasuka 4 does exactly what it was designed to do, and it still does it well against anything that transmits. It failed here because it was built to fight a specific kind of war, one where every drone had to talk to its pilot through open air, and that assumption quietly stopped being true. That's the pattern worth sitting with. Contested airspace built entirely around radio jamming now has a category of threat moving through it with nothing to detect. Doctrines and budgets built around exquisite, expensive electronic warfare systems are colliding with attritable weapons that cost almost nothing to lose. This isn't unique to Russia, and it isn't finished. Both sides are already working on the next answer, whether that's better optical detection, autonomous terminal guidance that needs no operator at all, or some third approach neither side has fielded yet. The jammer didn't lose because a better jammer beat it. It lost because someone stopped trying to outshout it and started asking a different question entirely. If you want to understand how the next shift in this war gets fought before it shows up in the headlines, that's the kind of breakdown this channel covers every week. Subscribe, and you'll see it coming.